So, guys, I want to review the South Park episode, The Brown Noise. And this is definitely a very interesting episode because this is kind of almost like a Mr. Garrison focused episode. And definitely in the earlier seasons, we kind of seen him as that silly teacher with a puppet. And people have psychoanalyzed Mr. Garrison and said that he probably has a narcissistic disorder or he has a form of borderline personality disorder. And and some of the symptoms of borderline personality disorder is definitely getting very, very emotional. So you take a certain side with something. For example, like in this episode, he he wished that his father molested him, and in another episode, like the Time to Leave episode, he becomes racist against African Americans, and then he also is angry with a lot of the immigrants in one of the episodes, so he says "fuck them all to death." And then in another episode, he decides to get a sex change. And then when he becomes a surrogate Trump, he does all the alleged behavior of Donald Trump, such as being a sexual predator. So he jumps to extremes very, very quickly, and that's what some people say borderline personality disorder is, or bipolar disorder or something like that. But I've not really well researched it. But in this episode, also, it was an early season episode. So sometimes what they did was they tried to cross all lines that they could really. And in this episode, the South Park kids are practicing their fingering so they can play the flutes and they can go to an event where it's 4 million kids playing the flute at one time to My Country 'Tis of Thee, really. And then what happens is led by Yoko Ono. So you kind of see, like, I think Trey Parker impersonate a Japanese woman. And, later on you kind of see those racist characters that he does of impersonating a Japanese woman or a Japanese man or a Chinese man, because it's kind of based on how some people look at Asians and see them as stereotypes. For example, Chef is a black stereotype, being fat, very dark skin, into soul music, and also kind of like standing out in a very white community because that's how some people look at blacks. So it's not that Trey Parker and Matt Stone are racist, it's just that they're pointing out the racism in society. So in this episode, they also kind of like have shock value in two ways. The major way is Mr. Garrison's story, which I'm going to talk about, but also what happens to the South Park kids is that they get called queefs by a bunch of New Yorkers, and a bunch of New Yorkers, they kind of are dressed in a very West Side Story type of way, and they kind of have like the New York Italian American accent, very similar to what you see in West Side Story, except there's a black kid with them, and he kind of dresses in that stereotypical like hip hop clothing, and they call them queefs. And I think this kind of goes down to how like children were learning new words in like high school and middle school that they don't realize are taboo. Because I remember like when high school people would say something's really tit, and tit just means like it's enjoyable, like a set of tits. And I also remember in high school that some girls were starting to call each other cunts, really, and a lot of people didn't know what the word cunt was because it was so like esoteric. And then I know for a while, like a few years ago, the word rape was used as a way of saying, I want to fuck this girl's brains out. This girl's so hot. If I see her, I would love to fuck her brains out. So there's always been words that have kind of been like very, very taboo becoming popular. Like I would even say the word nigger and nigga is a great example because I remember when I was in high school, a lot of people would quote Dave Chappelle, or a lot of people would sing rap songs that were white or other races and say the word nigger and nigga all the time. So it kind of goes into that all that talk really of words that are taboo that are actually are taboo or extremely inappropriate or that were not really used a lot and now kind of used a lot, type of thing really. And I definitely think that that's kind of their thing about not knowing what a queef is, and then also too is Trey Parker and Matt Stone that they always want to use all the language that they can really to kind of be like, okay, we're the first show to kind of use these words really, and then what happens is that they reveal like what a queef is, vaginal expulsion of gas, and what mung is, which is a form of vaginal discharge. I believe during like pregnancy discharge or STD or biological discharge. So, so to get back to the New Yorker kids, we're kind of making fun of them, calling them queefs, a word that they didn't know. They switched the notes. They switched everybody's notes on their musical forms, and they put the brown nose, which is a note where that's so low in frequency that it can make people defecate, and they just do it and what happens was they have it switched out 4 million times, so all 4 million kids are playing their music, and then they hit the brown noise, and it caused everybody on Earth to defecate. So this is kind of what you see in early South Park, is that they were trying to cross the lines, really, like having all people on Earth defecate. So technically, you're showing maybe like the ground zero, like where they were all playing the music. You see a lot of like feces all over the place, but then you see other episodes of Mr. Hanky. Like I think in the first or second season they introduced Mr. Hanky. So this is kind of like them saying, okay, we can show feces or whatever, because mostly on television you can really do that. I think you can't show human feces on television. Maybe in movies you can, but on television you couldn't. But if it's animated, you can kind of get some passes because people say it's an animation. So South Park was really one of the first shows that showed like human feces, or show it in a round in a very very in a big mass, you know. So, and it was also kind of there to be really controversial and just edgy, and that's that really. And then Kenny's death is that he shits himself to death, you know, which is something that can happen. So, you know, it was definitely, you know, like it was definitely kind of interesting, like how like back then they were still very taboo. And also in the season they had Chim Pokemon, which is an episode that was also that was good satire. This episode is more about like pushing boundaries in the sense of language, and also storytelling, and then also just showing like bowel movements. And now we're gonna get to Mr. Garrison, which is the meat of this. That, you know, Mr. Garrison doesn't want to go to Arkansas, so it's revealed that he was molested by his uncle, who like Mr. Garrison's like in his early 40s, I believe 43, so 41 or 43. But what happens is that he is molested by his uncle in his 40s, so it does kind of show that he is gay. I mean, you know, maybe the relationship is consensual, and, you know, maybe he has a molestation fetish, you know, because it's kind of revealed that Mr. Garrison likes to have dominant and submissive roles, and definitely, I believe he's bisexual. I believe he's pansexual or bisexual, but they kind of showed that he's also gay as well, really. So he does switch his sexual identities a bunch of times. And then what happens is that it's also revealed that he wants to go to Arkansas. He's afraid to go to Arkansas, but he needs to go to Arkansas because he wants to have his father molest him. And he believed that, you know, if his father molested him, that it is a form of expressing love, you know, because he heard in the media that, you know, like that's how parents show that, like, they love their kids, you know, because not just a physical attraction, a sexual attraction, you know, like just like in the movie Lolita, or there's a lot of stories of like incest, or even if you look at a lot of stories in like media about like teachers just showing an inappropriate love to students by sexually abusing them, you know. So it's kind of twisted that he wants that. And then I also remember hearing that some people talk of the episode and said, like, well, Mr. Garrison is gay, and he wants actually his father to molest him so he can have an excuse and say, okay, that's what turned me gay, was my father molesting me. Because there's a lot of, like, definitely Mr. Garrison's time, he's 40, so he was born in like the mid 50s, so he's around my parents' age. But definitely there were some conspiracies about how people turned gay, and one of the stories is that they were molested as children. So maybe he wished for that to happen so he can say, well, you know, being gay is not my fault, it's because my parents molested me. So maybe that's his kind of his end game, because, you know, he was very ashamed of being gay in earlier episodes. So maybe if he found something that people can say, okay, well, people think that I'm gay, I can say, well, I'm molested. Oh, well, people feel sorry for me. Therefore, I can kind of feel more at peace because I have an excuse to go by. And then the other thing that I will have to kind of say is that it's also kind of revealed that his mother actually wanted his mother actually wanted his father to molest him. So it kind of goes down into this really dark and disturbing storytelling. You know, very similar to the Scott Tenner Must Die episode, very similar to the Woodland Critter Christmas, or it's very similar to when Trey Parker and Matt Stone were doing a spoof of the joke The Aristocrats, like how twisted and fucked up the story can kind of go, really. And then what happens is that his father is also told by Mr. Mackey that he should possibly just molest his son, because more likely Mr. Garrison is so upset by it that he'll commit suicide. So again, it is played for dark comedy, like just how twisted all these South Park characters are. So his father decides to trick Mr. Garrison and make Mr. Garrison think that he got molested, and it was actually that he paid Kenny G to have sex with Mr. Garrison, but Kenny G um, liked it so much that he didn't want the money or whatever, really, so that way, Mr. Garrison, like Mr. Garrison Senior, um, tricks his son into tricks his son into thinking that he got molested, but he doesn't have to do it. Because I actually kind of think if they did have that, that would have been too far of an episode, or that would have gotten banned, because a lot of people would say, okay, that's encouraging incest, or that is such a or that really hurts real victims of parental sexual abuse, or you encouraging a form of incest, really. So it is kind of really dark in that sense, of an episode, but it's more like a shock value and how twisted a story can kind of be, really. But I do think that, the lingering thing is that definitely there's people who analyze South Park, and they would say that these are one of the episodes, this is like the first episode that kind of shows Mr. Garrison and his very twisted psychology. And then also, too, that this episode kind of allows other episodes to happen that focuses on the adult. So, like, definitely many of the episodes feature Chef, but there are some episodes like Chef Goes Nanners where it's a chef-focused episode. And then there's also, I think one of the most important episodes of South Park is the episode where Randy gets into a brawl and at basketball, at baseball games, and that's the episode that led to the creation of the Randy Marsh character. And then as the South Park creators have gotten older, they relate more to the adult characters. So definitely Randy, along with the South Park boys, have really kind of just helped the show kind of last a little bit longer, because you can tell story arcs with Randy. And definitely, I think this episode's also very important because it kind of encouraged that you can tell more stories with the adult characters and more like twisted and messed up stories. Like Randy doing OnlyFans was kind of if this episode never happened, then you wouldn't have the episode with Randy doing OnlyFans. If you didn't have this episode, you wouldn't have had other episodes with Randy like going and causing the pandemic and other things like that. Like this kind of was one of the first episodes showing that the adult characters could be really twisted and fucked up, really. So it's definitely a very important Mr. Garrison episode.